Welcome back. At age 10, William Kellibrew witnessed the murders of his mother and 12-year-old brother by his mom's ex-boyfriend. The killer took his own life that day, but not before making William beg for his life at gunpoint. Joining me is William Kellibrew. William, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Thanks for having me.
You know, I know that, you're going to share with us your story, and it's a story of trauma, but it's also a story of resilience and survival and your ability to be where you are today, sitting here beside of me, helping others. I think it's important for people who are watching our show to sort of understand your story, because I think that the key to that is when we have empathy and we can understand, then we're better equipped to be able to go forward in helping others. Could you tell us about your story, what happened to you, and what we need to know about that to help us as we learn from your experiences?
Well, first and foremost, I really appreciate the opportunity in being here and being able to share my story. I think when we share our stories, we often sort of foster this space where others can tell theirs and share theirs and learn from each other. And on July 2nd, 1984 was arguably the worst day of my life. The only reason I say arguably is because I had to wake up the next day without my mom and my brother, and that was a pretty horrible reality for a 10-year-old kid. And that morning, I woke up to the screams of my mom coming from outside of our home. And when it was all said and done, I had just witnessed my mother shot, along with my 12-year-old brother, my older brother, who was shot. And then, of course, you mentioned that I had to beg for my life that morning. It was very difficult for me to watch that and watch my leader, my guide, my protector, struggling that day, trying to save her own life and the life of her children, and having to go down that way. I often wonder what she was thinking. This is happening in front of my children, and how much she wanted to save us. We were very important to her, and she was to us.
Oh, of course. And I know that at that moment, it had to be just a horrific experience for you as a child. What happened next? What is the next thing? This happens to you. Who comes to your rescue? Who's there for you?
Well, in the immediate sort of situation, I was released from that room from my mom's ex-boyfriend, and he said, you can leave, but probably like any 10-year-old kid who's witnessed violence, where do we go? This is my family living room. And so where was I going to go? Who was I going to go to help for? And so I gathered and mustered up what courage I had left, and I stood up in that room that day, and I exited through that door one footstep at a time, and I left. I ran for my life, and police came to the scene, and so they immediately started to get the story and try to figure out what they need to do to move this situation to the next level. And eventually that day, as you mentioned, my mother's ex-boyfriend took his own life, and so when they shot tear gas in our home, they found my mom, my brother. My brother was still hanging on in a sense, but with 3 hours, it was just too much for him. And so our family, we were extremely traumatized that day.
And so sorry for your loss. I mean, even now as I hear that, it pulls at my heart, because I know how hard that had to have been for you, and as you talk about your family. What support system did you have in place? What was next for you? I mean, you've lost your family, you've been through a very traumatic experience. What did the system do to help you?
Well, even that morning I walked away with just my little shorts on and my tank top that was fitted. I remember that, with no shoes. And we walked away, and I never returned to our home again. And so we lost essentially everything that we owned to this event. And my grandmother, who was just a shining star, she took the helm. She grabbed the helm And she didn't do it with any training. She had a junior high school education. So how was this grandmother, who was a community member, going to be able to raise her children and really move the needle toward resiliency? But she was the example, Karen. She was the example every single day, getting up, showing us. We didn't know we had a superhero in the room, a shero of sorts in our home. But she woke up every day, an ordinary person who had an extraordinary job with extraordinary measures, to be able to show us what it means to be able to move forward.
Taking one step at a time.
One step, and you know, one breath, because the anxiety around these issues are so prevailing that it takes your breath away. That day I lost my voice in choice. In fact, I completely lost my voice. Physically could not say one word. I was so in shock, so frightened. I was afraid to talk. I'm even frail talking about it, because I remember that 10-year-old kid, me, who lost their voice. And so my grandmother really helped to shape and for me to regain my voice and my siblings' voices.
Now, your message to others, I mean, you've been through obviously a very traumatic experience, and you had your grandma. You know, you had that person there that was your rock, the person that helped you get through and take that one breath at a time. You know, what's the message to other victims that are survivors out there? How do they take that one breath at a time? How would you describe getting the help that you needed? You got it from your grandmother. How do they get the help they need? What's the message for them? I think that the most important message is that hope is certainly alive, and we have to tap that energy inside, whether we do it by ourselves or we have the examples of hope, which my therapists were the example of hope. I didn't call it that at 10 years old. I didn't call it at 13 years old, but that was it, you know, that hope. And that healing was absolutely possible. You know, I was silent for 3 years because our family strategy was to forget about it. And that's how a lot of families actually grapple with grief and loss. It's just simply to forget about it. But we know that's not possible. And of course, that was my strategy going into the 5th grade. I'm just going to forget about it. You know, but experts have said that the most common strategy or defense mechanism is for children to dissociate, go off into la-la land, to avoid the images. But if my teacher understood what was happening inside of my head, we could have developed a different approach rather than a punitive approach, because those symptoms I was displaying in school had meaning behind them. And I was a pretty hurt and broken down kid. And so I didn't know that healing was possible then. I didn't know that hope was possible then. And I say to victims and survivors, you find somebody, you find someone who you can trust, because we know that trust is the first casualty of early abuse. We have to trust people, we have to reach out, because that silence and isolation is deafening. It can destroy us, and it nearly destroyed me, and it led to suicidal thoughts and suicidal attempts for me. And so being able to have a support network, whether it's your school teacher, whether it's your therapist, whether it's your counselor, whether it's your mentor, to find somebody that you trust, because there is someone we trust. There are more good people out here than there have ever been anybody else. And so that's why we're here today, focusing on the issues. You know, I believe that. I truly believe there are so many good people out there that want to help. They just don't know how sometimes. And I do think that, you know, we're talking about the education system, we're talking about people in counseling, we're talking about your families, all of those people being on the same page. That's why we want to talk about trauma-informed care. That's why it's critical, so that people understand, because there were people who didn't understand you. That's right. You know, fortunately, you're here today and you were able to move past that, but it was a struggle, and it was a struggle that potentially some of it could have been avoided if there was a better understanding. Would you agree with that? I would agree with that, and that's what we're doing today. That's where my work is today. Since I have a sort of keen understanding of the impact that trauma has on not just the individual, but families and systems as well, it's important for us to be able to really put those into play. I say that resiliency, yes, is the ability to bounce back from adversity, but the key question for resiliency is, what are we bouncing back to?
where are we going back to when we're in residential treatment? Kids are going back home. Where we're at home, we're going into residential treatment. We're going into the educational system. We're going into juvenile justice and adult justice systems. Well, what are people going there to? And the trauma-informed care really gets at two points here. One is that we need to avoid the re-traumatization of people who have had a history of trauma. And number two, do no harm and don't create victims. And so it's not just our resiliency to bounce back. It really is about our ability to cope and to be able to access coping strategies, to be able to access alternatives to coping so that we can live each day not forgetting what happened, but figuring out how do we improve our lives every day and have a sense of well-being and inner peace that really affords us an opportunity to have a quality of life around wellness.
You know, we talk a lot in our system that, you know, we want three things for children. We want them to be safe, we want them to be healthy, but most importantly, we want to have them to have the opportunity to be successful. Right?
Oh yeah, I can taste it.
Yes, absolutely. And so to make them successful, we have to understand their experiences. And I certainly appreciated the message today about understanding the experiences of the child and the impact that things have happened to them have had on them and their behaviors. You know, what is always worrisome is this treatment of behaviors, not treatment of the cause of the behaviors. Do you think there are ways that we as a system can understand a little bit more about how do we approach children, youth, adults, people who have had trauma, and they're like, what do we say to them? What's the first thing that should come out of our mouth so that they understand that we are empathizing with them and we want to help them?
It's not your fault. Things have happened to you, but it's not about what's wrong with you. It really is about what happened to you, and to begin to uncover what's going on and be able to, I think, to recognize what's going on, to respond to that, and to refer a person over to, professional assistance.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of stigma around that, but it's important to be able to access and meet people where they are, because not everybody's going to access a system. And so we know that support happens at homes. We know support happens in communities. And so how do we support, not just help, but support these settings and systems to be able to respond to survivors in a way that's survivor perspective based, real self-guidance, self-adherence, and self-realization of, from their perspective, what does safety look like? From their perspective of what does hope look like? And we have to meet people where they are to begin to understand it from their perspective.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your story, William. When we come back, a well-known West Virginian tells her story of mental illness. Plus, we'll tell you how you can get help in West Virginia with just one call. Stay with us.